The man was already on his knees in the mud when she stepped down from her wagon. His broad frame, wrapped in a worn brown vest and dusted with snow, filled the small clearing like a fallen tree. 3 children clung to him, 2 standing with thin shoulders pressed against his sides, one a bundle of blanket and bone in his arms. Their faces were pale with hunger and cold, their breaths fogging in the high country air. "Ma'am," his voice cracked, deep but frayed at the edges, "I'll build you a new cabin if you'll feed my children." Sylvie Garner froze at the bottom of the step, the hem of her pale blue work dress brushing against her boots. For 15 years, she'd walked these mountains alone, every log and stone of her cabin set by her own hands. Visitors were rare, strangers with children were unheard of. Yet here he was, a giant of a man in a battered cowboy hat, kneeling in front of her as if the mountain itself had spit him out. She looked past him instinctively, scanning the tree line, the wagon ruts, the broken trail of footprints. Her father had taught her long ago. Nothing appears without cause. Her hand settled on the knife at her belt. "Who sent you?" she asked. "No one," he said quickly, as though rehearsed. "We've been traveling since Iowa. I heard about you in town. Said you might be willing to trade work for food." He shifted the baby on his arm. The child's small hand, no bigger than a bird's claw, gripped his coat. The oldest girl lifted her chin with fierce dignity. "Papa built the finest houses in Cedar Rapids," she said. "He can build anything." Sylvie's throat tightened at the sound of her voice. Hunger had not stolen the child's pride. The man pushed to his feet slowly, towering over her now. His hat shadowed gray eyes the color of storm clouds. "My name's Daniel Price. This is Emma, Thomas, and little Lucy." "I don't keep boarders," Sylvie said flatly. "I'm not asking for charity." His tone steadied, a carpenter setting a nail. "I've got my tools. I can shore up your walls, build a new roof, anything you need. Just feed my children through winter." Her gaze flicked to the children's shoes, soles worn thin, toes red from the cold. The boy pressed his face into his father's coat, trying to disappear. The baby whimpered softly, a sound too small for this harsh country. She had lived 15 winters up here, reading the sky like scripture, rationing every pound of flour, every bullet. She knew what it meant to survive. She also knew what it meant to starve. "Come inside," she said at last, surprised at her own voice. "All of you." The interior of her cabin smelled of smoke and venison stew. The stone fireplace held a steady flame. She ladled generous portions into wooden bowls, cut thick slices of bread, poured milk from the cow out back. The children sat at her rough-hewn table, eyes wide with disbelief, while the man hesitated at the doors, though afraid to bring his dirt and desperation inside. "Sit," she told him. "You too." He obeyed. Emma ate slowly, her back straight, as if she still remembered rules at some lost dinner table. Thomas dove into his bowl, broth dripping down his chin. Even the baby, perched on Daniel's lap, reached eagerly for spoonfuls. Sylvie watched them with a strange ache. "You said you're a carpenter," she said. 15 years, Daniel replied. "Frame houses, furniture, barns, whatever needs doing." "And your wife?" He hesitated, spoon halfway to his mouth. "She passed last spring. Consumption." The room went quiet, except for the crackle of the fire. Sylvie busied herself wiping the counter. She'd buried too many people in these mountains to pry at fresh grief. After supper, she showed the children the ladder to the loft. "It's warm up there. There are blankets." "We can't," Daniel began. "Yes, you can," she said firmly. "One night won't hurt anything." Emma's serious face lit up. "Really? Inside? Really?" As they climbed the ladder, Sylvie felt the rhythm of her home change. For 15 years she'd made decisions for one, spoken aloud only to the mountains. Now 3 small bodies rustled above her head, and a giant stranger sat by her fire, with his hat in his hands. She poured herself coffee and studied him. His clothes were worn but cared for. His hands were strong, long-fingered, marked by scars of honest work. Yet he kept glancing at the window as though measuring the distance to the tree line. "You're not from Millerville," she said. "No," he answered, eyes still on the dark woods. "Iowa." "Then how did you know I was here?" He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "People talk. I've made sure they don't." This time his smile faded. "We've been walking for weeks, Miss Garner. I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came here because my kids were starving." Her name in his mouth sounded like a test. She pushed back her chair and stood. "We'll talk about work tomorrow. Tonight your children need rest." He nodded once, a man accepting terms. "Thank you." The rest of the evening passed in uneasy quiet. Sylvie set out her rifle by the door, an old habit she hadn't broken. Daniel sat staring into the fire until the lines of his face softened and his eyes drooped. When he finally lay down on the floorboards near the hearth, he looked less like a threat and more like a man hollowed out by loss. But later, when the cabin had gone still and the only sound was the slow breathing of children overhead, Sylvie saw him stir. Quiet as a shadow, he rose, stepped to the door, and opened it a crack. The cold air rushed in. He stood there a long moment, looking toward the dark fringe of pines. His hand went to his vest pocket. For an instant she saw the gleam of brass, some kind of compass or instrument, before he closed his fingers around it and slipped it back out of sight. He wasn't here by accident. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the scent of snow down from the high ridges. Sylvie sat at her table, hands wrapped around her empty coffee cup, watching the giant cowboy framed in the doorway. He thought she was asleep. He thought she wasn't watching. But she was. And she knew with the same certainty she knew the coming of winter, that whatever had brought Daniel Price to her mountain was only just beginning. The morning came with the faintest warmth, a promise, not a gift. Sunlight filtered through the pine canopy and laid soft gold across the frost-laced clearing. Sylvie stood at her window, a steaming mug in her hands, watching as Daniel Price moved like a man with purpose. He was already outside, sleeves rolled, shoulders hunched over the north foundation of her cabin. He worked with methodical quiet, testing stones, shifting weight, reinforcing the understructure where frost had loosened the old mortar. Every movement was confident, efficient. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He simply knew what he was doing. "Morning," Sylvie said, stepping out onto the porch with her rifle slung across her shoulder, more habit than threat. Daniel looked up, squinting into the light. "Morning, Miss Garner. Found a bit of settling on this side, likely from runoff last spring." She nodded. "I'd noticed the draft, but hadn't had time to do anything about it." "I can shore it up before noon," he said, "if you've got spare stone, behind the barn." Without asking for help, he stood, dusted his palms, and headed toward the pile she'd built over years, stacked rocks from creek beds, scavenged slabs from landslides, all meant for repairs she never quite got to. Sylvie watched his back as he went, wide, solid, sure, like he could carry the world if he had to. And maybe he already was. Later, while Daniel rebuilt the corner with the kind of care a man might give to a cradle or a coffin, Emma followed Sylvie down to the creek. The girl's steps were lighter today, less wary. She didn't flinch at every snapping twig. "Your papa really knows how to work wood," Sylvie said. Emma looked up with a quiet kind of pride. "He says it talks to him, like it tells him what it wants to be." Sylvie knelt beside a set of faint tracks in the mud and motioned the girl closer. "See these?" she asked. "Tell me what you notice." Emma crouched, her knees brushing the cold earth. "Split hooves, 2 toes. Deer?" "Buck," Sylvie confirmed. See how deep the prints are? He's heavy. That means he's probably older. Walking slow. Emma studied the prints, her brow furrowed. Where's he headed? Upstream. Probably toward the salt lick. That's where we'll set snares tomorrow. Emma nodded seriously. You'll teach me? I will if you listen better than Thomas. The girl grinned, and the light that touched her face struck Sylvie with a sudden pang. It had been so long since a child had looked at her with anything but fear or suspicion. Emma's trust came slowly, but it came. By afternoon, the old foundation was stronger than it had been in years. Daniel turned his attention to the lean-to that passed for a barn, reinforcing beams, patching the roof with cedar shakes from his own satchel. He was a man who traveled with tools, a man who expected to work. During a break, Sylvie brought him a mug of warm coffee. He took it with both hands, grateful. I've been meaning to ask, she said, not looking at him directly. How'd you hear about me, really? Daniel hesitated. Just a fraction. Bartender in Millerville. Old fellow, grey beard, said there was a woman up here who might take a trade for repairs. Sylvie turned sharply. Grey beard. He nodded. Wiry guy. Called himself Hank or Hal, something like that. There's no one like that in Millerville, she said flatly. And the silver dollar's run by 2 women. Neither has a beard. Daniel blinked, caught for a second. Maybe it was one of the loggers passing through. Said he'd heard it from someone else. Funny how folks suddenly start talking about me after 15 years of not. He looked away, adjusting his hat. We weren't exactly taking the main road. I asked questions in every town west of Omaha. She let the silence stretch, let him feel it. Then turned and walked back toward the cabin, jaw tight. That evening, the smell of venison stew filled the one-room house again. The children gathered at the table, warm and fed. Emma had washed her face and braided her hair like Sylvie's. Thomas barely looked up as he shoveled in food, and Lucy's round cheeks were pink from sitting by the fire. It felt wrongly, wonderfully, like family. After supper, Sylvie cleared the table while Daniel tucked Lucy into the nest of quilts in the loft. The baby's soft babble floated down like bird song. Emma followed Sylvie into the kitchen corner. Can I help tomorrow? She asked. You already are, Sylvie said softly. Daniel returned with a worn leather satchel in one hand. Reinforcements are done, he said, and I repaired the lower gate. Should keep out elk. You work fast, Sylvie said. He shrugged. Work keeps the fear away. She glanced at him. Fear of what? He didn't answer, just lowered himself onto the bench and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Later that night, long after the cabin had gone quiet, Sylvie stirred from sleep at the sound of coughing, a child's cough, sharp and sudden. She threw off the quilt and climbed to the loft ladder, her boots silent on the worn wood. Thomas lay curled under a blanket, his face flushed, breath shallow and fast. His little body trembled, damp with fever sweat. Daniel appeared beside her, moving faster than she'd seen him move all day. He dropped to his knees beside his son and touched the boy's forehead. Oh God, he whispered. No, no, no. Sylvie moved into action, her hands steady. She fetched a cloth, dipped it in snow-melt water, and pressed it to Thomas's face. He's burning, Daniel said. He was fine at supper. It hit fast, could be the creek water, or something he picked up on the trail. I can't lose him, Daniel said hoarsely. I lost Sarah. I can't. Sylvie looked at him then, really looked, and saw the fear beneath the broad shoulders. The man who had dragged his children through mountains wasn't built of stone. He was a man with everything to lose. He needs rest and fever tea. I'll get the willow bark. Daniel didn't move. His hand clutched the boy's arm like it might vanish. You'll lose him if you freeze, Sylvie said gently. He nodded once, then twice, and backed away like a man stepping off a cliff. Sylvie turned to the cabinet, heart pounding. Her hands went for the dried herbs, but as she measured the bark, she caught movement outside the window. So Daniel stood by the tree line again. Only this time, he wasn't just staring into the woods. He was holding something in his palm, a brass compass, turning it slowly. Not for direction, for memory. And his mouth moved as if he were speaking to someone not there. A name, maybe, or a vow. In that moment, Sylvie understood. Daniel Price hadn't stumbled onto her cabin by chance. He had been searching, and not just for food, not just for shelter. He had come to find her. The boy whimpered upstairs, and Sylvie turned back to the hearth. Whatever secrets Daniel carried, they were heavier than she'd guessed, and winter had only just begun. The trail was barely there, little more than a deer path winding through the snow-dusted pines. Sylvie stepped lightly, avoiding the brittle twigs that could snap underfoot. Behind her, Emma tried to imitate every movement, watching the ground, listening to the hush of the mountain. "Slow your breath," Sylvie said over her shoulder. "Don't chase the woods. Let it come to you." Emma nodded, serious as always. Her scarf was pulled snug under her chin, her cheeks pink from the cold. But there was a brightness in her eyes Sylvie hadn't seen the day they arrived, something that looked like wonder. They crouched beside a shallow depression in the snow. Sylvie traced the edges with her finger. "Rabbit," she murmured. "See how the hind feet land ahead of the front ones? That means it was moving fast." Emma leaned in, her breath fogging the air. Running from something, or just trying to keep warm. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. The girl considered that quietly. "You know a lot." Sylvie smiled faintly. 15 winters will teach you. You either learn fast or you learn cold." They continued up the ridge, where the sun broke through the clouds and cast long stripes of gold across the snow. It was a good morning, still and sharp, the kind Sylvie used to treasure in silence. But today, she found herself listening for the crunch of small boots behind her, the girl's soft questions. "Did you grow up in the mountains?" Emma asked. Sylvie hesitated. "Not exactly." "Where then?" "Far from here. A place with too many people, too many rules. I left when I was younger than you are now." "Why?" The word landed gently, but it splintered something in Sylvie's chest. She crouched again, pretending to study a new set of tracks. Fox, this time. Fresh. Because it wasn't safe to be myself there. Not the kind of safe that matters. Emma nodded slowly, like she understood more than she should. Mama said that once. She said being safe in your body doesn't mean you're safe in your heart. Sylvie looked at the girl. Your mama was wise. Emma's face darkened a little. She was. And then she got sick. Papa tried everything, but she still died. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was respectful, like the forest paused to listen. I'm sorry, Sylvie said. Emma shrugged, but her chin wobbled. We don't talk about her much anymore. Papa says it hurts too much, but I remember everything. Her voice when she sang, her hands brushing my hair, the smell of her soap. Sylvie reached out and gently touched Emma's arm. Those memories matter. Don't let them fade. They returned to the cabin just after noon, arms full of kindling and hearts heavier than when they'd left. Inside, Thomas was curled near the hearth, still pale but sleeping peacefully. Daniel was busy outside, shaping beams for the new goat pen with a handsaw and square. Sylvie set the kindling down and stepped out to him. He's strong. Fever's down. Daniel didn't look up, but she saw the tension ease in his shoulders. Thank God. She watched him work for a moment. He was precise, quiet. His movements had rhythm, not just skill, but care. He handled wood like some men handled prayer. Emma's sharp, Sylvie said. Learns fast. Daniel gave a faint smile. She takes after her mama. Sarah had this way of knowing people, even when they didn't want to be known. Sylvie crossed her arms. Tell me about her. He paused, hand resting on the beam. Sarah was bright. Not just smart, but luminous, like she carried her own lamp around with her. She liked lilacs. She hummed when she baked bread. And she never let me give up, even when the world gave every reason to. His voice cracked just slightly on the last sentence, but he kept his eyes on the wood. How'd she? Started as a cough, he said. Springtime, just after the last frost. Thought it was nothing. Then it wasn't. Sylvie looked down. She knew that kind of sickness. She'd buried a trapper once, helped dig his grave with bare hands because the ground was too hard for a shovel. You did everything you could. Doesn't feel like enough. It never does. He finally looked at her. She made me promise one thing, keep the kids safe. No matter what it took. That's why you came up here. He nodded. That's why I'd climb every damn mountain on this range if I thought it'd give them a chance. They stood there a moment, not speaking. Not needing to. That night, the children gathered close while Sylvie taught them to twist pine needles into cord. Lucy sat in Daniel's lap, gnawing on a chunk of bread and humming tunelessly. The fire crackled, the cabin smelled of stew and pine smoke, and for the first time in years, Sylvie felt the ache of something old. Company. The comfort of other voices, the rhythm of family. She hadn't realized how quiet her world had become until this one filled it again. When the children were asleep in the loft, Daniel stepped outside to check the sky. Sylvie followed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The stars glittered like cold sparks above them. You miss Iowa? She asked. He took a deep breath. Some parts. Not the way folks looked at me after Sarah died, like I'd done something wrong by surviving. They're not looking at you like that here. Not yet. He turned back toward the clearing where tomorrow he planned to cut new lumber. Sylvie followed his gaze. A fallen oak lay across the path, split from storm damage. The bark had peeled back in places, revealing aged, weather-worn wood beneath. Daniel stepped closer, running his hand along the grain. This one's good. Heartwood's still strong. Might be able to use some of it for the new shed. He bent to check the trunk's core, and his hand paused on something carved into the wood. Looks like someone left a mark here, he said. Sylvie walked over, her pulse slowing to a crawl. She already knew what he'd found. Her fingers reached out, trembling. Sem plus JB 1867. The letters were faded but unmistakable, chiseled into the tree with the awkward certainty of youth. She remembered the day they were carved. A picnic, a promise, a mistake she'd buried 15 years deep. Daniel looked up. You okay? Sylvie stepped back, eyes fixed on the carving. Where'd you say you found this? Edge of the Western Grove, 2 miles out. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat closed like the mountain was pressing down on her. Daniel touched her arm lightly. You knew whoever carved that. Sylvie's voice was almost a whisper. Once. A long time ago. She turned and walked back toward the cabin, not waiting for questions. Inside, the fire had dimmed, but the heat remained. She sat alone, hands folded tight, the name burned into her thoughts. J.B. James Blackwood, a name she had spent years trying to forget, a life she had fled, and now, like a half-rotted tree root, it had surfaced again. Outside, the wind shifted, and from the corner of her vision, she saw Daniel standing still beneath the stars, staring not at the cabin, but toward the west, toward the grove, toward the past. The sound of hammering echoed through the clearing as Daniel worked on the new goat pen. Each strike was steady, deliberate, like he was driving out more than nails. Sylvie watched him from the cabin porch, her arms folded tight against the morning chill. She hadn't slept well, not after seeing those initials, not after the way her chest clenched when Daniel asked if she recognized them. He hadn't pushed her for answers. He hadn't needed to. She could feel the questions building between them like kindling, waiting for the right spark. Inside, the children were stringing dried apple slices on twine. Emma sang softly under her breath, an old tune that Sylvie hadn't heard since before she left Savannah. It pierced her like an arrow. Emma's voice drifted out through the open window. Mama used to hum this when she brushed my hair. Sometimes she'd sing it when she wrote in her little book. Sylvie stiffened. What book was that, honey? Emma shrugged. Her red one. The one Papa keeps in his satchel. A beat passed before Sylvie responded. You mean Daniel still has it? The girl nodded. He reads it when he thinks we're asleep. Sylvie stepped down from the porch and made her way toward the pen. Daniel glanced up as she approached, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. I didn't know you had something of hers, she said, skipping pleasantries. He straightened, jaw tightening. I didn't think it mattered. It matters. Daniel looked away. It's not for anyone else to read. I'm not anyone else. His eyes returned to her, storm-colored and guarded. It's all I've got left of her. Sylvie didn't press further. Not then, but her unease deepened. She turned her gaze toward the tree line, where the snow had melted just enough to expose half-buried roots and scattered debris from the last windstorm. The forest was beginning to wake, and with it came ghosts. That afternoon, Sylvie climbed to the ridge alone. She needed to breathe air that hadn't been warmed by children's breath or thick with unspoken truths. Her feet carried her farther than she planned, to a small grove of birch trees where sunlight flickered like candlelight through the branches. Here, once, she had made a promise. A foolish one. Sarah Millicent Ashford. That was the name carved into the deeds, the journals, the legacy she had cast aside. Daughter of Judge Alton Ashford. Promised bride to James Blackwood III. She had run in the night, left behind a silver ring, a weeping maid, and a house full of people more concerned with scandal than salvation. And now, like a curse, that name was stirring again. When she returned to the cabin, she found Daniel crouched near the root cellar, squinting at the horizon. He was holding something in his hand, small, round, and metallic. Didn't know you kept a compass, she said quietly, behind him. Daniel jumped slightly and closed his hand. Just a habit, army thing. You still use it? He hesitated. Sometimes. To check the stars? Or the property lines? His head turned slowly. What are you asking, Sylvie? She stepped closer. I saw your tracks last night. You were out past the ridge, not looking for firewood. He didn't answer right away. I needed to get my bearings. For what? Daniel sighed, standing to face her. I'm not your enemy. You came here with starving children. I gave you shelter. Don't lie to me now. I'm not lying. I needed to be sure we were safe. Safe from who? She snapped. Or safe for who? His silence said enough. Later, while the children napped and Daniel took his tools to the west end of the barn, Sylvie went inside. The satchel was tucked beneath his cot, scuffed and stained with trail dust. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The first thing she found was a wooden toy horse, carved and worn smooth. Then a pocket knife, a small sewing kit, and finally, a stack of folded papers wrapped in oilskin. She slid them out, heart pounding. Deeds, maps, legal documents, all of them stamped with the seal of the Blackwood Family Trust. She stared at the name at the top of the page, James Blackwood IV. One letter was addressed to Mr. Daniel Price. It was short, formal, a contract. She read it twice, barely breathing. They had sent him. He had been paid. She dropped the papers like they burned her fingers and backed away from the cot. Her ribs felt too tight, her skin too thin. The warmth of the cabin now felt like a trap closing around her. Outside, she heard Daniel laughing with Thomas. The boy must have said something funny. His voice was loud and bright. Innocent, but it couldn't cover what she'd seen. A man didn't carry deeds for someone else's land without reason. A man didn't stare into the woods each night unless he expected someone to come. Sylvie sat down hard on the edge of the bed, staring at the open satchel, the secret spilled out like bones. And in her mind, she heard the echo of a voice she hadn't heard in 15 years. "You'll always be mine, Sarah. No matter where you run." Outside, snow began to fall again, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was the certainty that the past she buried had just found its way to her front door. The storm broke just after midnight. Wind hissed around the eaves and rattled the shutters, making the cabin groan like a ship straining at its moorings. Sylvie lay awake in the loft, eyes open to the dark, her sister's name pressing against her ribs like a knife. She couldn't ignore the papers any longer. The satchel still sat where she'd left it, its contents folded back inside, but the knowledge wouldn't go back with them. She rose quietly, careful not to wake the children, and crept down the ladder. The fire had burned low. Daniel sat by it, boots off, head bowed, his hands working the edge of a folded letter. He looked up at her approach, eyes shadowed by the dim glow. "You've been reading my things," he said softly. "Not accusation, just fact." Sylvie didn't flinch. "I had to. You've been living under my roof with your secrets. Now they're mine too." Daniel set the letter on the table and rubbed his face. "I never meant to deceive you. Then what do you call this?" She tossed one of the deeds onto the table. The blackwood seal glinted in the firelight. "You came here carrying this. You looked me in the eye and told me you needed work." "I did." His voice broke low. "And I still do. My children still need food. That part was never a lie." "You were sent." "Yes." He straightened, his size filling the small room even when he sat. "James Blackwood IV. He heard rumors about a woman living on land his family owned. A woman who matched the description of someone his father once." He caught himself. "Once knew. He paid me to find her." Sylvie crossed her arms, knuckles white against the fabric of her sleeve. "And you did." "I found you, yes. But not for him." Her laugh was sharp. "You expect me to believe that?" Daniel pushed the letter toward her. "Read this." She stared at the envelope. The handwriting was faint, feminine, looping. A tremor ran through her chest even before she recognized the name. "My dearest sister." Her knees gave out. She sat, the chair cold beneath her. Hands trembling, she opened the letter. The words swam. "If Daniel is reading this to you, then I have passed from this world, and he has found you at last. I pray that both events bring some measure of peace to hearts that have carried too much sorrow." Sylvie's breath caught. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." "She asked me to find you," Daniel said quietly. "She told me everything before she died. She left this letter for you." Sylvie's eyes darted back to the page. Memories rose with each line. A girl with golden hair sneaking into her room at night, whispering secrets under the covers, laughing at things their parents would never approve. "Sarah. I knew you must be confused, dear Sylvie. You knew me as Sarah, your younger sister." She dropped the letter to the table, pressing her hand to her mouth. Daniel's voice gentled. "She married me under the name Sarah Price. We have 3 children together, Emma, Thomas, and Lucy. They're yours too." The words landed like blows and blessings all at once. She stared at him. "My sister. She's dead." He nodded, eyes glinting with grief. "Consumption. This past spring." Sylvie's gaze drifted to the loft where the children slept, breathing softly. Blood of her blood. Her sister's eyes staring out of Emma's solemn face. Her sister's stubborn streak in Thomas, her grandmother's curiosity already shining in little Lucy. She wanted you to have them, Daniel said. Not as a burden, as family. She knew you'd built a life here. She knew you'd run. But she believed you could give them something I couldn't give alone. Sylvie looked back at the letter, reading on through the tears. They deserved to know about their mother's family, about the aunt who chose courage over comfort. Most of all, they deserved to grow up surrounded by people who will love them unconditionally. The room blurred. Her sister's words wrapped around her like a quilt she hadn't known she still needed. Daniel sat very still. I took the Blackwood job because it gave me a reason to come here, money to travel, and a cover to find you without scaring you off. But Sarah's letter was the real mission, not James Blackwood's. Sylvie wiped her face with her sleeve. So you're telling me everything, the starving father, the carpenter, wasn't a ruse? He shook his head. The hunger was real. The work is real. My children's need is real. The deception was only in the reason I came. Her voice cracked. And now you expect me to forgive you? No. Daniel's voice was raw. I expect nothing. But I promised Sarah I'd bring them to you. I've kept that promise. What you do next is up to you. Silence spread between them, thick as the snow outside. The only sound was the wind pressing against the cabin walls and the faint creak of the loft as a child turned in sleep. Sylvie's hands still clutched the letter. The ink had smudged under her tears. She had spent 15 years building a fortress out of timber and distance, and now her sister's children slept above her head. Her sister's husband sat across from her, worn down by grief and guilt. She thought she had nothing left to lose. Now she realized she had everything to gain and everything to risk. Outside, a branch cracked under the weight of snow, sharp and sudden. Sylvie flinched, heart thudding. Daniel's head snapped up. He rose, crossing to the window, peering toward the dark tree line. His shoulders tightened like a man expecting trouble. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Nothing. Maybe just the wind. But his hand went to his coat pocket where the compass waited, and she knew he was still measuring the land, still waiting for something or someone to come up that mountain. The mountain morning came too bright after a night of no sleep. The fire had burned down to a hush, but Sylvie hadn't felt warmth in hours. She sat by the window, her sister's letter still folded in her lap, her thoughts tangled like branches after a storm. Daniel stirred behind her. She heard the creak of his cot, the rustle of worn flannel, the slow exhale of a man who'd said too much and didn't know what came next. He didn't speak, not right away. Finally, his voice came low and tired. "I don't regret telling you." Sylvie didn't turn. "No, you just regret I found out." Daniel crossed the room, boots thudding softly on wood. "You think I planned it this way? That I meant to show up here, lie to your face, fall asleep every night hearing my kids laugh with a woman I—" He cut himself off, jaw flexing. She looked up at him then, and the anger in her chest softened, just a little, because his eyes weren't defensive. They were pleading. "I don't know what this is," she said. "What's happening between us? But I've been hunted before, Daniel. Lied to. Promised everything and left with nothing. I won't fall into that again. I wouldn't let you." "You already did," she said too quickly. "You let me care about you. About them. And all the while you knew who I was. What this place was. You knew what was waiting on the other end of that mountain." Daniel stepped back like she'd slapped him. He reached into his coat and pulled out the oilskin envelope again, the one with the Blackwood seal. "This," he tossed it onto the table, "was a rope I took because I thought I could climb out of a grave with it. Thought maybe I could turn it into something better." "You mean turn me into something better for you?" "I mean give my children a chance, and give you a chance to be something more than a ghost in the woods." She stared at the envelope like it might grow teeth. "So you'd rather lose your soul than lose a payday?" His voice cracked. If I finish the job, I get what's left of the money. Enough to buy land, food, safety. That's what I agreed to. But I won't take it, not if it means dragging you back down the mountain in chains. Her breath caught. So, that's the choice? Them or me? No, he said, quietly this time. The choice is truth. I'm choosing it. Right now. Sylvie studied him. He looked older than he had just days before, more worn, but there was a steadiness in him that made her want to believe. Maybe not in his words, but in his intentions. She nodded, barely. Then we tell the children. Up in the loft, morning light was slipping between the slats. Lucy slept curled in Emma's arms, and Thomas had one hand hanging over the edge of the bunk, snoring softly. They gathered the children downstairs around the fire, still wrapped in quilts. Sylvie knelt before them, unsure where to begin. I need to tell you something, she said. Something you deserve to know. Emma's eyes narrowed. Are we leaving? No, Daniel said gently. But there's a truth we kept from you, about who Miss Sylvie really is. She's not Sylvie, Thomas asked, confused. She is, Sylvie said. But before I was Sylvie Garner, I was Sarah Millicent Ashford. Emma blinked. Mama's name was Sarah too. Sylvie's voice thickened. She named herself after me, I think. Because she loved me. Because I was her big sister. Emma looked between the two of them, pieces clicking together in her smart little head. You're Mama's sister? Sylvie nodded. That makes me your aunt. Thomas's mouth dropped open. We have an aunt? Lucy, not quite understanding, clapped her hands and giggled. Daniel placed a hand on Emma's back. We didn't tell you before because it was complicated. We didn't want to confuse you or make you feel unsafe. Emma tilted her head. But we're not leaving. No, sweetheart, Sylvie said, tears in her eyes. You're home. The cabin filled with a hush so deep it felt holy. For the first time in years, Sylvie felt like she belonged to something again. And for the first time since Sarah died, Daniel saw a future that didn't end in grief. He looked at Sylvie across the hearth. We can start again. Together, if you want that. She didn't answer. Not with words, but the way her fingers reached for Lucy's and the way her shoulder leaned ever so slightly into his said enough for now. Later that day, while Daniel chopped kindling behind the barn and Sylvie was sorting jars in the pantry, the first sound reached them like thunder splitting the air. Hooves, not one horse, several. Sylvie froze. Daniel dropped the axe mid-swing. From the ridgeline came the unmistakable clatter of 4 riders, followed by a 5th. James Blackwood IV rode at the center, tall, clean-shaven, with a coat too fine for the mountains and the eyes sharp enough to gut a deer. Beside him, 4 men, lean, leathered, and armed, fanned out with practiced precision. Daniel stepped onto the porch, muscles coiled beneath his shirt. Sylvie came up beside him, rifle slung low but ready. Blackwood reined in his horse and removed his gloves with a smirk. Miss Ashford, he called. Or should I say, Garner. His voice sliced the air, and everything Sylvie had feared for 15 years came riding up her hill. The wind held its breath as James Blackwood IV dismounted. His boots crunched into the brittle snowpack, polished black against the dull white earth. The other 4 riders fanned out like wolves, hands resting not casually but knowingly on the butts of their sidearms. Their horses, trained and patient, huffed quiet clouds of steam into the air. Sylvie stood on the porch of the cabin she'd built with her own 2 hands. Daniel at her side, his stance wide, unflinching. Behind them, the wooden door remained ajar, just enough for 3 pairs of young eyes to peer out from the shadows within. James smirked as he pulled a folded document from inside his coat. I always said you'd wind up in the wilderness, Sarah, he said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. Never imagined you'd turn feral. Sylvie didn't blink. You came all this way to insult me? No, James said, holding out the paper. I came to resolve things. Peacefully. She didn't take it. Daniel did. The ink was fresh. Legal. It was a contract. Between James Blackwood IV and one Daniel Price. Payment upon confirmation of a certain woman's identity and her agreement to vacate Blackwood lands. $50,000. Enough to build 10 cabins, feed a town, bribe a judge. Daniel's jaw tensed. That offer was before I knew the truth. Truth is, I own this land, James said. Truth is, your claim never was legal. My father signed that deed in a drunken stupor during a hunting trip. Never registered. Never honored. Sylvie kept her voice flat. But it was real. Only on paper. And paper burns. He stepped forward. Take the money, right away. The past can stay buried. Not everything buried stays dead, she said. James laughed. You think you're brave, don't you? Living out here in your little shack, playing mountain mother. But you and I both know you weren't made for this place. I made this place, she said, with calloused hands and a broken heart. You don't get to walk up that hill and pretend it's yours just because you have a stamp and a fancy name. Last chance, he said, the edge creeping into his voice. 50,000, and you disappear. Daniel stepped between them. No, James turned to him. You broke contract, Mr. Price. Daniel didn't flinch. Then sue me, but you're not taking her, and you're not taking this land. Sylvie glanced sideways at him, something unspoken passing between them. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of county law. If we marry, he said to her, low but firm, we can file a joint claim. As husband and wife, with dependents, we qualify for protective consideration under Frontier Property Acts. Enough to stall him, maybe enough to win. Her heart stuttered. You want to marry me now, out of legal convenience? No, he said, turning fully toward her. Because I believe in you, in this place, in us. But yes, because it's also the only way to fight him without blood. Blackwood snorted. You think some backwater wedding will hold up against my lawyers? We'll find out, Daniel said. Or are you afraid a bunch of dirt-poor orphans and a woman with a shotgun will embarrass the great Blackwood name? That flicker of anger was all it took. One of Blackwood's men shifted in his saddle, signaling. The other three moved in closer. A hand rested fully now on a revolver. Sylvie backed toward the door. Children, she called calmly. Go to the crawl space, just like we practiced. Little footsteps hurried away. The door closed behind her. Blackwood stepped forward, lips thin. This can go easy or hard. You don't scare me, James, she said. You never did. You should. He motioned to his men. Daniel stepped down off the porch, hands raised just enough to show calm. You come onto this land with weapons. You better be ready for what comes next. You threatening me, Price? No, Daniel said. I'm warning you. In one motion, he grabbed the axe from the chopping block and swung it around in a slow arc. Just enough to show he meant it. Blackwood's men didn't blink. They'd seen worse. Done worse. Sylvie had vanished into the cabin. 2 seconds later, the window shutter slammed open and her rifle barrel leveled square at the lead rider's chest. Nobody fires unless you do, she called. But if you do, you won't leave this mountain. The tension pulled tighter than a fiddle string. Every man waited. Breath, wind, silence. Then, from the distance, far up the slope, a rumble. Subtle at first, like thunder underground. Then louder. Blackwood's eyes darted upward. What the hell is that? The riders turned in their saddles. Daniel's blood turned cold. Above them, from the snow-laden ridge, a plume of white was breaking loose. Wide, fast, ruthless, avalanche. The mountain roared. Sylvie dropped the rifle and screamed for the children. James turned toward his horse, too late. Daniel grabbed Sylvie's arm, pulling her toward the root cellar as the sky turned to snow and fury. Behind them, the world exploded in white. The sound was like the sky splitting in two. The avalanche thundered down the mountain in a wave of roaring white, swallowing pine trees, snapping trunks like kindling. Daniel didn't look back. He didn't need to. The deafening rumble was already chasing their heels. "Get to the root cellar," he shouted, yanking Sylvie by the arm and pushing the cabin door wide. The children were huddled by the hearth, eyes wide, feet frozen in place. Emma screamed when the windows shattered behind them, wind and snow slamming through. "Move!" Sylvie cried, scooping Lucy into her arms. Daniel swept up Thomas and barked at Emma. "Go! Crawl! Now!" The hatch to the root cellar groaned as Sylvie threw it open. The air down there was damp and black, a cave dug long ago for cold storage and storm safety, but never for something like this. They piled in, hearts pounding, just as the world above them cracked. Snow hit the roof with the weight of a falling mountain. Beams groaned. Something gave. A heavy thud above, then silence broken only by the sound of their breathing, fast and panicked. Daniel wrapped his arms around all of them, holding them close in the dark. The floor vibrated beneath them like the pulse of a wounded earth. Then stillness. Long, terrible stillness. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. No one spoke, not even the children. The only light came from a crack between floorboards above, muted and gray. Eventually, Daniel climbed the ladder and pushed on the trap door. It didn't budge. He grunted, shoulders straining. Sylvie stepped in beside him. Together they pressed up, shifting weight. Then it moved. A sliver of light broke through. Cold air flooded in. He shoved it open enough to poke his head out. What had been forest was now wasteland. Trees torn up, ground buried. The upper slope of the ridge looked shaved clean. And silence, unnatural, complete, had settled like a blanket over the valley. The men who had stood with Blackwood were nowhere in sight. But one of the horses, its leg twisted beneath it, lay just beyond the crushed remains of the barn. It groaned. Daniel moved to put it down swiftly, whispering something soft before he pulled the trigger. Sylvie emerged behind him, children clinging to her skirts. The cabin still stood, though the back half had caved in. The porch was gone, beams snapped and scattered like matchsticks. But the main walls held. The stove, miraculously, still glowed red inside. Daniel pointed toward a patch of gray fabric half buried in snow. They dug carefully. A body, James Blackwood IV. Dead. His polished boots were still gleaming, though one had been torn clean off. His coat, tailored and fine, was ripped open at the chest. A jagged branch had pierced through like a bayonet. Sylvie stared at him, breath visible in the cold air. He always said the mountain would bend to his will. It didn't. They found two more of his men further down, buried shallow, faces frozen in shock. The other two must have escaped or been swallowed whole. Neither Daniel nor Sylvie spoke of burial. The mountain would take care of its own. That night they returned to the damaged cabin and made the front half livable. Daniel reinforced the beams while Sylvie made stew from the last of the preserved venison. The children huddled close, shaken but alive. Emma whispered, "Are they coming back?" Sylvie brushed her hair from her eyes. "No, honey, the mountain made sure of that." Over the next week they patched the roof, melted snow for water, and buried what needed burying. A week after the storm, a rider from Millerville arrived, a wiry man named Clyde who worked the mail routes and knew too much about everyone's business. He had come, apparently, looking for Blackwood. The man had been expected back for a shareholders' meeting in Denver. Daniel and Sylvie exchanged a look but told the truth they could. "There was a snowslide," Daniel said. "A bad one." "And Mr. Blackwood?" Clyde asked. Sylvie nodded. "Didn't make it." Clyde scratched his beard. "Figures. Fool man wore polished boots into the mountains. Snow's got no patience for pride. He left a few provisions, promised to tell no tales, and handed Sylvie a letter with a wax seal she didn't recognize. It was from the county land office. She opened it slowly, expecting threats or fines or worse. But the letter was short. To Miss Sylvie Garner, née Ashford, by order of the State Homesteading Ordinance and given your continued residency upon the disputed parcel for 15 consecutive years, your claim is hereby recognized and recorded. Title is transferred for the price of $1. A new deed will follow. She read it twice, then looked to Daniel, who blinked in disbelief. $1, he asked. I suppose 15 winters counts for something. She looked out toward the slope, still half buried under the avalanche's aftermath. The sun was setting behind it now, casting long shadows and gold light across the snow. For the first time in years, she felt the land breathe with her, not in resistance, but in acceptance. As she folded the letter and tucked it close to her chest, Lucy tugged at her sleeve. Does this mean we can stay? Sylvie knelt beside her. It means this land is ours now. All of ours. The little girl smiled and ran back to her brother. Sylvie looked at Daniel, her voice quiet. It was never really about the deed, you know. He nodded. No, it was about the fight to keep what matters. As night fell again over the mountain and smoke curled from their patched chimney, neither of them saw the second rider far off, watching from the tree line. But he saw them, and he turned back toward town with news no one had expected. The mountain thawed slowly, stubborn as any old soul clinging to winter. But the valley below had softened, the sun hanging longer each day, the snow pulling back like a tide. Spring was coming, and with it, a kind of quiet hope Sylvie hadn't dared name. Daniel knelt by the stone slab he'd hauled from the creek bed 2 days prior. It was flat, weighty, and imperfect. Exactly right. His hands, rough from axe and shovel, now worked with finer care as he traced the chisel over the rock's cool surface. Each letter took time. Each letter mattered. Price Garner, 1883, not a gravestone, a foundation, one they could stand on together. He set the stone at the foot of the rebuilt cabin, half buried into the front step, so that every soul who walked across that threshold would know. This land belonged to more than just history or hardship. It belonged to a family now. Behind him, laughter bubbled from the trees. Emma ran barefoot through new grass, chasing Lucy, whose arms flailed like wings. Thomas, stick-sword in hand, leapt off a stump with a triumphant yell. Sylvie sat on the front porch, a quilt across her lap and a book open, though she hadn't turned a page in 10 minutes. She watched them play and marveled, not for the first time, how children carried sunlight even on cloudy days. Daniel joined her with a mug of coffee, both of them quiet for a moment. "Stone set," he said. She looked at it, a smile tugging her lips. "It's real, then." He sipped. "Always was." She turned to him. "You want to hear about your wife?" Daniel nodded. "I do." The children were still close, so she lifted her voice just enough. "Your mama," she began, looking toward them, "was brave in ways you can't imagine. When I ran, she stayed. When I hid, she wrote me letters I never had the courage to open until now. She loved big and loud and full of fire. She'd braid my hair in the mornings, then climb trees in her good dress just to pick the higher apples." Lucy giggled, wide-eyed. "Mama climbed trees?" "Oh, yes," Sylvie said, "and she'd sing while she did it, so loud the whole orchard could hear." Emma was listening too now, arms stilling, eyes soft. "She loved you," Sylvie said, "more than anything, and she'd be proud of how you've grown, how strong you are, how kind." Daniel's throat tightened. "You tell it better than I ever could." "I was her sister," Sylvie whispered. "Now I'm theirs too." Later that afternoon, a weathered man arrived on horseback. Reverend Eli Whitman, who'd baptized half the county and married the other half. His hands trembled from age, but his voice still carried scripture like thunder when he wanted it to. They cleared the small patch beneath the cottonwood tree. Daniel wore his one good shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Sylvie stood barefoot in her soft blue dress, hair braided back. The children lined up like saplings, Emma holding Lucy's hand, Thomas fidgeting with his boots. Reverend Whitman didn't read long. He'd married enough folks to know words mattered less than looks. And the look Daniel gave Sylvie when she slid the thin iron ring onto his finger would have made any skeptic believe in vows. Sylvie's voice didn't shake when she said yes. Daniel's voice caught when he said, "With everything I am." Afterward, the children danced around the fire pit while Sylvie stirred a pot of rabbit stew and Daniel played a tune on a mouth harp. So out of tune it made Lucy shriek with laughter. When the stars came out and the valley dipped into hush, the family gathered in the cabin, warm and full. Emma was the last to speak that night, her voice small in the candlelight. "Can I ask something?" Sylvie turned. "Of course, baby." Emma looked at her brothers, then at Daniel, then finally at Sylvie. "Is it okay if we call you Mama Sylvie now?" The words hit like a song she hadn't heard in 15 years. Sylvie nodded, eyes shimmering. "I'd be honored." 3 sets of arms wrapped around her, and Daniel stood nearby, heart cracked wide open. Outside, the stone on the step caught the moonlight just right. Price Garner, 1883. Not the end of a story, the beginning of a legacy. Spring arrived like a long-forgotten promise. It began with the thaw. First, the ice receded from the creek, water trickling in hesitant lines before swelling into a full, eager current. Then the ground softened, snow withdrawing from the trees, revealing stubborn green shoots beneath. Birds returned in noisy bursts, and elk tracks reappeared along the ridge trail. Life didn't rush back. It settled in, slow and steady. Daniel stood under the unfinished awning of his new woodworking shed, sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow. The air smelled of pine shavings and oiled iron. He was fitting a cedar beam into a post, the rhythm of the mallet-on joinery like a song he'd known before. Grief had silenced him. Beside him, Thomas handed over nails like a proper apprentice, watching every move with focused eyes. "You see this line here?" Daniel said, tapping the grain. "That tells you which way the wood wants to go. You fight it, it'll split, but if you listen, it'll hold strong." Thomas nodded, small but steady. "Like people." Daniel looked down, smiled. "Exactly like people." Not far away, beneath a line strung between 2 poles, Sylvie hung skeins of dyed wool, pale indigo, soft rust, spring green. Her loom sat near the cabin, half-finished fabric flowing over its edge like a waterfall of color. Emma knelt nearby, sorting dried herbs onto cotton cloths, laying them out like precious treasures, wild chamomile, sweet yarrow, fir tips, and sage. "You can dry them this way," Sylvie said, brushing hair from her face, "or hang them in bundles. Either way, they'll last all year." Emma looked up, her voice curious. "How'd you learn all this?" Sylvie paused, eyes scanning the ridge behind them. "From needing to survive," she said. "But now, I do it to teach. That's different." The cabin, now fully repaired, looked almost new. The front step still bore the carved stone. Price Garner, 1883. Flowers had sprouted around its edges, tiny mountain violets and stubborn little daffodils that Sylvie swore she'd never planted. Inside, Lucy arranged twigs and dolls by the hearth, telling stories to no one in particular. Every so often she'd glance up, just to make sure Mama Sylvie was still in view. Evenings came slower now, the light hanging longer in the trees. Supper was hearty and full of laughter. They played games Daniel remembered from his boyhood. Sylvie read aloud from old books. No one locked the door. One Sunday, Reverend Whitman returned, this time with a hand-carved plaque. "Where love rests easy," gifted from the women's sewing circle down in Millerville. They'd heard rumors, of course. The recluse had married the widower. The mountain had swallowed a Blackwood hole. Somehow, word had reached the county judge, and no one came to dispute the land anymore. "They said you saved each other," the Reverend told them. "That's the kind of thing worth building a church over." And Sylvie, for the first time in many years, didn't flinch at the idea of community. They were already one. That night, after the children had drifted to sleep beneath the thick quilts Sylvie had sewn, she and Daniel stepped outside, mugs in hand, silence between them as warm as the coffee. The stars were sharp above the peaks, scattered like spilled sugar. Daniel tilted his head back, breath curling upward. "I think Sarah is watching." Sylvie touched his hand, lacing her fingers with his. "And smiling," she said. He didn't speak for a long while. When he did, his voice was low, quiet. She always wanted the kids to know what peace looked like, what it felt like. Sylvie leaned her head against his arm. Now they will. Far off in the woods, an owl called. The breeze carried the scent of spruce and springtime. Below them, the light from the cabin flickered golden through the windows, casting soft shapes that moved like shadows of a future already begun. Daniel pulled her close, his chin resting atop her head. "Home," he murmured. Sylvie nodded. "Finally." And they stood like that, two souls forged in hardship, mended in love, watching the stars together with no need for more words. Because sometimes the greatest stories don't end with thunder. They end with quiet and warmth and roots that grow deeper with time. But out beyond the ridge, past the pines and creek, another path waited. Another cabin, half burnt. Another motherless child. Another cowboy with a war-worn heart. And the mountain, always watching, knew the next story was coming. If this tale stirred something in you, if you believe in the kind of love that builds from the ashes, subscribe to Western Legacy. Because the West is wide, and we've got more stories to tell.